All right, so I think we are going to get started. And I know both of you know both of us, but we are recording this there are some folks who've requested access who may not be familiar with us. And so we're going to record it for them at a later date. My name is Rosalie Rodriguez. I am the Director of Multicultural Student Services at Bucknell University. And I have invited with me today Dr. Christina Johnson, who is a staff psychologist in the Counseling and Student Development, also at Bucknell University. Christina, do you want to introduce yourself or your background?
Sure. So my training experience has been in college settings, community-based mental health services, and nonprofit organizations working with racial and cultural minorities. And with that background, I am a staff psychologist at Bucknell, also the multicultural specialist. And so throughout my training, I have helped individuals work through the effects of cultural forces and social structures on their psychological well-being. So that's been my background since I've been in higher education.
Nice. And I like to clarify for my own background, because I am technically a psychologist, but I'm a community psychologist. So I do not do counseling anywhere in the same way that Dr. Johnson does. But I work more on looking at communities and helping them to access resources and to navigate power systems, so that especially underprivileged communities can find the sources of power, navigate around those systems, and kind of make choices for themselves that give them more of a sense of control over their own destiny. A lot of my work recently has really been around focusing on issues like food insecurity and also disproportionate ways that communities of color in particular are impacted by environmental policy, and I've really love focusing on self-care and kind of challenging some of the narratives that we have around what it means to do self-care, to use counseling or psychological services, and understand that there are ways to reframe some of the traditional narratives that have been really geared for a particularly white audience in ways that are really much more representative for communities of color. And that's essentially what Christina and I are going to try and partner up and do today. And this is, a conversation. So if either of our participants have some question or would like to jump in at any time, please feel free to join us. I did just want to give a little bit of background about why we're talking specifically about living with ambiguity and why at this particular moment. So when I'm talking about ambiguity, I'm really, there's a lot of different ways to define it. It really is just uncertainty, not really knowing what is coming next. And there are, it is also the idea of this ability to kind of hold multiple truths, that it's possible to be stressed and in a difficult or traumatic situation and to also be okay at the same time. And sometimes that's really difficult to hold both those truths. And in particular, with this, the age group that Christina and I work with, which are predominantly 18 to 24, 25-year-old young adults, this is a time period when they are already contemplating what it means to move from really rigid ideas of truth into much more nuanced ideas of gray areas. And right now with the pandemic, I think a lot of folks have that developmental stage has been interrupted or thrust into a kind of new understanding of what it means to be okay and be experiencing trauma at the same time, and or just be having been okay for a really long time and being kind of thrust back into a much more ambiguous situation than they might have been at school. So we're going to unpack some of these things and talk a little bit more about what those things mean, get into this idea of what that reverse culture shock that I mentioned at the end, and present some hopefully tools and resources that you can use for yourself, take for your students, recommend to other people. Christine, is there anything else that you want to add to just the background of why we're doing this now?
Sure. And so At this time, everyone is having to embrace uncertainty. Therefore, creating a platform that is transparent about uncertainty not only validates spoken and unspoken experiences, but also works to helping individuals identify ways to manage unpredicted change. And so I think this is definitely a time to really talk about this topic, especially when it does come, when we're starting to think about our communities of color and marginalized groups. So I'm excited, honestly.
Yeah, I think very timely.
Yes.
So Dr. Johnson, can you talk a little bit about what some of the, as we're talking about this, we don't need to get necessarily into all of the nuances of all of the theories, but some of the background that does get into, this idea that we just mentioned, that, this is a natural time period in developmental stage for young adults where they are moving from these kind of more rigid ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, safe and unsafe, into more nuanced gray areas. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So there is this idea that younger adults show less capacity to cope with uncertainty than older adults. And the reason being that older adults are more comfortable with uncertainty because they have years of experience and life events to draw from. And so when I think about identity development, when I think about experience for younger adults, two things come to my mind. One is just racial identity development, and the other one is Kohlberg stages of moral development. So in terms of Kohlberg, adolescents and adults fall within the conventional level of moral reasoning, where morality is judged by comparing their actions to societal views and expectations. And a lot of us already know that. So the question is, as you think about Kohlberg, is what happens when uncertainty shadows normalcy? And I have just kind of doing my research, even in Kohlberg's empirical studies of persons across their lifespan, Kohlberg came to notice that some people evidently had undergone moral stage regression. And so it sounds like that while some individuals are able to move onto the last stage, which is the post-conventional level, where abstract reasoning using universal ethical principles are accomplished, others may be struggling with some sort of moral conflict due to some sort of uncertainty, depending on that stage you're in and what may be going on in their external environment. And then as we continue just to think about racial identity, let's say specifically racial identity, each group of individuals, whether we're looking at Black racial identity or white racial identity, go through stages of cognitive dissonance, where each individual moves to the next stage in their development once they're able to relieve themselves of this tension. With that said, there is something about resolving inconsistent truths, or in this case, resolving uncertainty when it pertains to a person's identity. So, as we think about just these theories, these developmental theories, while we're moving from one stage, or while these students, let's say ages 18 to 25, are moving from one stage to another is the goal, a certain amount of uncertainty or these gray areas throughout the process may halt the developmental process. However, I think it's also important when we're thinking about certain communities, we're thinking about certain adults, some younger adults are more comfortable with uncertainty due to life events that have occurred in early stages of their life and continue into younger adulthood. And I think the best example, or the population that most people would look at, would be communities of color and other marginalized populations. And they tend to be seen as being more familiar with this state of uncertainty due to the disparities that affect communities of color and other marginalized populations within the United States. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That information was in there.
I think, I think about the discussions that I have with students often in their, first and second year of college. Really, sometimes it's the first time they have been in a situation where they are the only person of their race or ethnicity in a classroom or in a dorm room. And so they're starting to have to define for themselves their own idea of what it means to be a person of that race, of that culture, of the geographic location that they're coming from. And oftentimes that looks very rigid. This is what I need to do in order to signal to other people that I belong to this race, that I belong to this identity group, whatever that might be. And sometimes, especially I think a lot of those stages that you talk about have this resistance stage where it's kind of like I have to push back against anything that does not fit within this very particular view of what it means to belong to this group. And I think as you were saying, right, like as we have more experiences, as we learn more, as we, meet people from different backgrounds, we get more comfortable, and students get more comfortable with recognizing that there isn't one way to be a certain thing. There, for me, there's no one way to be Latina. There's no one way to be Puerto Rican, right? If I speak Spanish or I don't speak Spanish doesn't make me any more or less Latina, doesn't make me more or less Puerto Rican, but that takes some time to get into that stage, right? And I think, the other piece that we're talking about here is this might be, the first time students are having the ability to really navigate this, and maybe having some safe space when we're talking especially about other marginalized identities like LGBTQ identity, where they're safely being able to explore that, and even sometimes racial identity outside the confines of what a parent or a family member is saying. This is what it means to be this particular religion, this particular race. These are the things that you need to do, right? And being able to kind of define that for themselves. And so for those folks who are in that stage where they're really either transitioning, or maybe they have transitioned and now they're being sent back home to a place where maybe there's less certainty, or there's more rigidity, or there's more questions about, can I be whatever I have decided for myself, right? Whether it is coming out with my queer identity, whether it is defining for myself what it means to be Latinx, all of those pieces. Can I still do those things now that I'm home?
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I think with everything you're saying, college for some people is a way to escape from the uncertainty, because now you're in this smaller community, there's more of a routine, you have this support group that you are able to establish that maybe you weren't able to establish in another environment. The unfortunate thing is, I think with uncertainty is it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And so now you go from being in this, let's say, safe place where everything is to be expected. You know what I mean? Like you already know what Monday through Friday is going to look like. And now, let's say we have this pandemic, perfect example, you're back in uncertainty. And now you're coming to a place, you're leaving your college, your safe place, you're leaving your college environment and going back home where you have less control of what's happening around you, less say in the decision-making process, and your independence is compromised. And so now you're kind of back in this uncertainty that you were able to escape momentarily. And so finding a way to kind of, I guess, well, using your term, which is the reverse culture shock, is pretty much like, oh my goodness, I'm back here again. And now having to adjust your life to realize like, oh, well, no, I've been kind of in this uncertain place for some time. I just had a little taste of, let's say, consistency. And even that right there causes a lot of cognitive dissonance, because, you've established your identity somewhere else, and now you're having to reestablish your identity, in your place of origin, but it still feels different, you know what I mean? So yeah, this reverse culture shock is definitely something I feel like a lot of our college students are experiencing right now. And it happens fairly quickly.
Yeah. I think the other place I think I see that is, in particularly with lower income students who may have come from a place where what the next day looked like for a long, most of their life may have been very uncertain, right? Maybe there was a certain level of comfort with that consistent inconsistency, if that makes sense, right? Like maybe I don't know where the next meal is coming from. I don't know where I'm going to be sleeping tomorrow. And college has been that place where they have been able to move from a day-to-day orientation of, I need to figure out where the next meal is coming from, figure out where I'm going to sleep. And college has been the place where they can start to have those basic needs on a consistent basis, so they can move into some of those higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy, right? The self-actualization, contemplating identity, contemplating, their future and thinking 5-10 years in the future, right? I know a lot of the conversations I have with students is really moving into this idea of, sacrificing now for a longer term reward that can sometimes seem really nebulous, right? A graduate degree, a career 20 years from now. And if you've grown up consistently worrying about where the next thing is coming from, just those basic needs, that you've made it that far, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, you've made it all the way to consistently thinking about, I need to make this decision today because it will affect what's happening 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, my grades to get into graduate school, my, the internship that I get this summer that's going to help me get the job. That now it's not just being thrust back into, that piece that we've been talking about, but we're actually asking them to do both of those things at the same time, right? If they're moving back into that situation where maybe housing, maybe food is insecure, and maybe it's just because of the pandemic, folks are experiencing that insecurity, not as a regular basis, but because a family member who has been a provider has lost a job right now. But we're still asking them as students, those who are enrolled, to continue not only thinking about where your food is coming from tomorrow, whether or not you can afford to keep the lights on, but also to continue thinking about that future orientation of 5 and 10 years from now, which can be really overwhelming, right? If nothing else, they could compartmentalize prior to the pandemic, when I was going to be really focusing on the future and thinking about, my plans for that, and maybe at home that I'm more thinking about day-to-day kind of things. And right now, all of that has really been compressed into this one situation.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that while we realize that there are a lot of students who are kind of in these places of uncertainty, we're really quick to state, oh, how resilient they are. But I think one thing to acknowledge is resilience takes time, and so it is great that we know that some individuals, yes, they're used to this uncertainty throughout their life, but even to get to a point where they're resilient and they're, let's say, okay with this inconsistency, that isn't something that happens overnight, and that's something that's constantly being reevaluated throughout their life. And I think that's something that we need to continue honing in on as faculty, as staff, as professionals, realizing that it comes and it goes. Some days are better than other days. And then for those who they're constantly having to deal with those inconsistency, how are we supporting them? How are we helping them to reevaluate, let's say, their locus of control? Because, sometimes you feel like, okay, I can do this on my own. Sometimes you feel like society is just pushing up against me. And so it is really important to have these conversations as well, regardless of how strong a student may say they are, because this has been my life story.
Yeah. And I think what you just said is so important. It's so important to have that conversation, if nothing else, than to just normalize it for the student, to make them feel seen and acknowledge that what they're dealing with isn't just because they are not resilient or they're failing at life. I hear students all the time that I just got to get my life together. It's like, you're not the only one. Like, we are all kind of dealing with this uncertainty, this ambiguity right now. Even the faculty members, the staff members who you are trying to keep your grades up for are also dealing with this in their own homes, in their own personal lives, and recognizing that, they're human too, and hopefully are not expecting you to be a machine. To be a little bit more gentle with yourself, a little bit more forgiving of yourself. And I think, your comments about resilience, I think, are really important and really lead us into what I'm hoping that the crux of this is really just this idea of, like, how do we build capacity? What are some of the things that we can do to work on the resilience now, being that we don't necessarily have all of the tools and resources that we might have had when we were on campus, or, maybe at home, it is completely different to try and do some of these things in our homes, to try and do self-care when there's 5 or 6 people in the house, all trying to, use the same resources at the same time.
Yeah. And it seems as though Josh, I don't know, Josh, I want to allow you to speak. Did you have something you would like to share?
Well, I was just going to say that I think that's such a great point, Christina, that you make, because I think sometimes when students come to an authority figure and they tell their story, and then that person reflects back, wow, that was really hard, you're so resilient. The students are like, okay, yeah, that's great, you're paying me a compliment, but it doesn't really help me at all. And I think the reminding everybody that, you know, resilience comes at a cost. You know, I think that's often when we see folks. So for the folks listening, Joshua Blum, a psychiatrist over at the CSDC, working with Christina, I think that's typically when we see folks is that they've tried and they've done what they have the capacity to do. And it's often much more, it's often a lot, but it comes at a significant physical and mental health cost often. And that's one of those things that I think is not necessarily talked about very much, because you know, everything does come at a cost. And I think sometimes I think I don't want to say disadvantaged students, but I think sometimes when students are given these opportunities that they're like, oh wow, now all I have to do is just follow the game plan. I just have to get through, and then things will kind of be good for me. And then when there's a setback, it's like, oh my God, now I'm going to have to go back to the way home was or everything like that. And I think that's one of the biggest issues of what's happening right now, is that people are literally seeing everything that they've worked for kind of disintegrating before them. And I think it's the developmental piece, I think, is so key, because, you know, I think we know that the brain doesn't fully myelinate until people in their 20s, sometimes even early 30s. And so I think helping folks just remember that it's not the end of the world necessarily. This will pass. We've had epidemics and pandemics before, maybe not necessarily to this capacity, but I think we've had them before and we've gotten through them, and that we'll get through this one too. But I think it's a hard thing necessarily to keep that in mind when you're seeing all the stuff that you've worked so hard for kind of, you know, going down the tubes, it feels like, and it may not actually be that way.
Thank you for that. I totally agree.
Absolutely. And I apologize. It's really hard for me to see the screen. Everybody's so tiny. So, I mean, are there other questions that folks have before we kind of move into tips or tricks or things that people would like to add who have joined us? Well, Christina, what is your wise wisdom for kind of building some of this this capacity?
I mean, I think the most important skill is learning to cultivate an inner peace. And this can be as simple as spending at least like 20-minute outdoors or even alone every day, meditating, creating a feel-good playlist, that's my choice, practicing gratitude to cultivate positive. And again, I'm going to go back to the goal is looking at your locus of control is, what do I have control over? You know, there are a lot of things we cannot control in this moment, but there are things that you can control around your household. You know what I mean? Yes, you can't control, let's say, a sibling or a parent from being argumentative, but you can definitely control yourself by going in your room and just kind of locking the door and just spending that alone time. And so I think that at this time, because you can't really escape from your situations, there are a lot of things that you're gonna have to learn to be more creative. And I think creativity can look differently for each individual. For some individuals, that's like doing a spa day, or that is maybe coloring. For other individuals, there is no space, you know what I mean? And so that maybe is walking outside for 5 minutes. But I think it's really important that we stay open to what, I guess, works best for us. You know what I mean? We can go on Google and we can find a whole bunch of self-care ideas, but some people don't have the resources. And so it really is about adjusting, not really adjusting, but more realizing what is close, what is in your vicinity, what is something you can use, you know what I mean, that doesn't cost too much money. And also just realizing, again, that fresh air goes a long way. And I've been kind of like promoting that to all my clients, which is just go outside, even if it's 5 minutes. Sometimes just getting the fresh air on you, getting some sun on you, even getting the rain on you, you know what I mean? It makes so much of a difference. And it gives you a chance to just kind of breathe and just remove yourself from the distractions around the world, on the news, in your household. And, you know, that's free. Fresh air, it is free, you know what I mean? And so definitely taking advantage of that is what I've been promoting for those who don't have the resources to purchase items.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this idea of re-envisioning what that self-care looks like. I have a whole nother workshop that is really about whatever, I use Audre Lorde's term of radical self-care is, moving away from these mainstream narratives that self-care means a spa day. It means, spending money on ourselves to pamper ourselves. Self-care can just mean putting a playlist together. It can mean taking a nap. It can mean, opening a window if you can't get outside. Maybe you're, caring for children in your home and leaving the house isn't a feasibility at the moment, but you might be able to open a window, like you said, just get that sun on your face. And so, thinking about different ways in this moment when some of the things that we are used to having at our disposal are not there, how can we reimagine those? One of the pieces for me that I think, I spend a lot of time, I say, practicing, thinking about some Buddhist philosophies, and a huge tenet is really like this idea that so much of the way that we think about pain and pleasure is tied into our intrinsic value. That if I am a good person, I will be rewarded with pleasure. And if I'm a bad person, or if I do bad things, then I will be punished. And that those things, we can all think of examples when that is absolutely not true. And I think, so many times I've had conversations, even during all of this with students, is if I can't get motivated or my paper isn't the perfect paper, then, my value is less as a person. I don't have as much to offer. The quality of work that I usually do, if it's not an A paper right now in the middle of a global crisis, then I am a horrible person who has failed at life. And I think, just spending some time is really with ourselves, just undoing those narratives, uncoupling that value of us as a person being tied into our productivity, being tied into the things that we're able to, the grades that we're able to produce, the ways that we're able to make things or do things for other people as inherently whether or not we have value just as a human being. It's right now, especially, it's such I think a dangerous narrative. And I tell students, you were given the option for the pass fail for a reason. It's not because you're not capable or other people aren't capable. It's because it's a really important tool. I use this analogy of, this wheelbarrow often, and I say, yeah, see you struggling to push this boulder up the hill, and I'm coming along, or some of your professors coming along with this wheelbarrow and being like, I see you struggling there with the boulder. Do you have this wheelbarrow? And the student is kind of like, no, I'm good. I can do it. Well, yeah, I know you can do it. I believe you absolutely can. But if you use this wheelbarrow, it might be a little bit easier to get that boulder up the hill. And I think so many times our students are, telling themselves that if I don't struggle to do this the hard way, then I haven't proven my worth, that I haven't proven how good I am at doing something, at overcoming this obstacle, whatever it might be, even when we're standing there offering them the wheelbarrow to kind of help through the difficult situation.
Yeah. And one thing I'm going to add also is I think it's very important for us to help students to acknowledge their stressors and realize that, what you're feeling is normal. If you're coming from being at Bucknell where the only thing you had to focus on was just your academics and maybe a job, and now you're going back home where you have multiple responsibilities, you're a caregiver, your house is full, you barely have a room of your own. And you also have to still try to make an A in order to continue at Bucknell. Like, these are things that are definitely going to make it harder. And I think that, especially when we're looking at, let's say, just take a multicultural aspect, a lot of individuals are family oriented. And so with going back home means so many more responsibilities, you know what I mean? And it's uncertainty when it comes to medical expenses, when it comes to food in a house, when it comes to what tomorrow is going to look like, because, you know, we just don't know exactly what to expect from this pandemic. And so this whole idea of just being compassionate, you know, and to cultivate self-compassion is really important, and something that we all need to continue to hone in on is, yeah, you know, today isn't going to be the best day. Why? Because you are carrying a truck on your back. You know, you're taking care of so many people. And so I don't know if people realize, and maybe they do, but just how many young adults are out there who have multiple roles when they go back home. And they're no longer just a student, you know what I mean? They are a tutor to their younger siblings. They are a caregiver to their grandparents. They're a caregiver and emotional support to their parents, you know what I mean? Maybe there's people within the community that they're also helping. And so I think it's also important, again, that we, as I will continue to say, is understanding your locus of control. Because yes, we can look at external factors and say, well, that is what's determining how I feel each and every day. But the reality is, well, you can't control that. Some of those things you're just going to have to continue doing, because that's, for lack of a better word, that's just the hand you were dealt in life, which is fair to you, and it's tiring. But there are also things within your control. You know, no one can take away your peace. No one can take away your sanity. And so it's those things we want to continue focusing on, knowing that, you know, there are places where you can get the support that you may not be able to get from your family, because your family needs you. And so how do we find that balance between making sure that you are, you know, psychologically okay, and you're still able to complete the multiple tasks? We never want to, I guess, ignore the fact that, you know, we can have this discussion all day about, you know, what to do and the uncertainty people are dealing with and the struggles and the disparities within these communities of color and marginalized groups. But the reality is that doesn't change anything, you know what I mean? How can we help you still carry this truck on your back and still be able to take a breath of fresh air at least 5 to 10 minutes out of the day, and also commend you for doing what you're doing? And you also realize that we get it, you know what I mean? No one said it's going to be easy, but how can we support you through this process, even if it's for such a short period of time?
Mm-hmm. I think what you just said, just when you started with this acknowledgement, you know, one of the pieces that I have for connecting is just finding that crew, finding that support system, you know, whoever that is it one person, is it a group of people that you rely on? And it doesn't have to be people that you are there to fix the problem, but who just acknowledge and can hear what you're dealing with and say, yeah, that's real. You know, what you're dealing with is difficult and what you're going through is difficult. And, you know, just hold that space. They don't have to fix it, and you don't have to fix their issues either. And you know, we are in spaces right now where we can't fix a lot of the problems. We don't even know what needs to be fixed or how to fix it, because this is new for all of us. But being able to just hold that space where we can acknowledge those things for each other. I think especially when we're talking about people of color, people from marginalized communities who have been so conditioned to suppress their emotion, to suppress their physical response, to suppress their needs in order to keep going, that just holding that space to acknowledge those difficulties and that it's absolutely real, that truck is on your back, and I might not be able to remove it for you, but know that it is there, and I can see it, and I can acknowledge that for you. And that in and of itself is a piece of the way that we sit in community and heal each other. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah.
So we wanted to, before I move on to kind of resources, anybody have questions or anything? We've had a few more people join us. Okay. Christina, do you want to talk a little bit about some campus resources? I know CSDC has been doing some groups and other resources that are still available even though students are not here.
Yes. So yeah, of course, we're still available as the way we've been available, just in a different, just using a different modality. We are doing clinical consultations with students who would prefer continued support throughout the semester. Protocol is still in use as well. So even after hours, after 4:30, there's always someone that is able to provide support if necessary. There's also a counselor on call. So of course, if you just need additional support from someone at the CSDC, you are able to speak to the counselor on call. We definitely have some programs throughout the week, such as we have a meditation group. We also have a peer support group on Wednesdays. So we have a number of things, honestly, online. We're providing information once a week, it's about various topics. Sometimes I think this week's topic or next week's topic, it may be nurturing mental health. We had one with coping with isolation and loneliness, another one with just regaining normalcy in the state of chaos. And so we have a variety of topics just for students who may not want to actually connect by phone, but may just want to read things in their own private time. And so that definitely is available through the CSDC. Counselors are still available as well. So you can either email us, you can call us, but we are available same business hours as we have been throughout the semester.
And the 24-hour line is still operating and
yes, it is still operating. Yes, it is still. So everything is still up and running. Yes.
So we are still here, Multicultural Student Services, all the diversity and inclusion offices. We are obviously not on campus, but we are responding to email. We are doing Zoom calls. I'm doing, lots of one-on-one conversations with folks. I know my colleagues are as well. While the programming pieces are coming to end across student affairs, Res Life has been doing a lot of outreach as well. All of those things that we provide, you can still reach out to us, right? Just because there isn't necessarily a Zoom, or a game night going on doesn't mean that we can't set something up to kind of help you through. Dean of Students office as well. We're here all through the summer, and we'll be responding to emails and able to set up Zoom calls, able to set up phone calls if you don't have access to a good internet connection. Whatever needs to be is the same thing for the rest of our offices. I think.
And I also I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're fine. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, for individuals who feel as though, okay, they need to be connected with providers in their home state, we're also providing that support as well, trying to make that connection with either a mental health counselor, a psychologist, psychiatrist. All of that, of course, is taking place. And so we're there to support students if they decide, that they would if they need additional services in their state. But also just doing check-ins and following up with people. So no one's left behind. We want to make sure people are transitioning appropriately.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think one of the things we had talked about earlier was Psychology Today. I think you all are great resources to help refer folks.
Yes.
I often have used Psychology Today as I'm moving into different places to try and identify not just who's there, but you can sort it by who takes your insurance, what modalities that they work from. If you want someone who really is good at EMDR, you can find just those people who do EMDR. You can find just those people who have a specialization in working with LGBTQ youth, who work specifically with Black students, with Latinx students, with Asian identities, right? So it's a really wonderful resource to kind of figure out who's in your area and how to connect to some of those resources. In addition to other things that you might be familiar with, either religious and spiritual centers that are closer to home, or social services. Many locales have a 211 or a 411 number where you can call for an array of emergency services. I know here in Lewisburg it's 211, and that can be anything from responding to domestic violence. It could be responding to a housing emergency, a food emergency, healthcare, mental health assistance as well. I actually have another slide about more podcasts and Facebook groups, but a lot of the things that you see on campuses are also available in local communities for folks. It just might not be called the same thing. So you're having to look a little bit deeper for what you need. Do you have anything to add on that, Christina?
No, I mean, I agree totally that Psychology Today is definitely one way to locate a therapist in your area. Every therapist is kind of using a different modality. So of course, you know, this may be an opportunity to find what works best for you. But yeah, I think it's definitely a great source, and you can kind of tailor it to your specific location, as you said, exactly what kind of therapeutic style you prefer, gender, all of that is something to take into consideration and is available for you through Psychology Today.
Absolutely. I did want to mention before I forget that if anybody wants these slides or a copy of this video, you can drop your email address to me either in a private message or in the group chat, or you can email mss@bucknell.edu, and I'd be happy to send it to you when everything is done today. These are what we have on this slide are some of the podcasts and or Facebook groups or websites, IG addresses of folks that Christina and I both follow and get a lot of inspiration and wonderful connection with. I know I have to give a shout out to Mariah Royal, who is on the call, who introduced me to this Liberate app, which I think is really fantastic. It is a meditation app created by people of color, for people of color, specifically to look at different ways to meditate. And it can be a 5-minute meditation all the way to an hour. You know, whatever you need, it can really be tailored. And it's not just a like generic, let's find this in this moment, but like maybe you need to tap on the strength of your ancestors at this moment to really get what you need to make it through this moment. You know, there's a meditation for that. You know, it's much more tailored to the ways in which I think Black and Indigenous people and people of color find strength and find resilience and find connection that are much more familiar to us than maybe some, again, the more mainstream ways that are out there for folks.
Last thing I also want to just include, yes, I think your slide just said, I was like, yeah, there's so many blogs and Instagram accounts. If you really enjoy social media, I didn't realize how many different modalities they have in regard to mental health services. So you don't typically have to actually do a one-on-one. You can sometimes just go on someone's page and inspirational quotes, and that can go a long way. I love quotes, like literally, yeah, I adore quotes. It speaks for me. And so sometimes having someone speak for you is easier than trying to formulate the words yourself. So I definitely am happy that you were able to post these. Yes.
I have been tuning in as I can this week to a webinar, or I guess it's a conference that my colleague Bill McCoy, who's the director of LGBTQ plus resources on campus, introduced me to, called the it's something more summit, Explore More Summit. And it's really been fantastic. And I got to hear a really wonderful presentation from Dr. Jennifer Mullen, who runs an IG account called Decolonizing Therapy. And I learned so much in that webinar, and I'm now following her. I put her in that list of the one right before this, added her to, other pages like Latinx Therapy, Black Girl Therapy, that I've had already been following. But, sometimes you don't even know where you're going to find some of these things. And, some of them are going to really mesh with you, and some of them just aren't going to, and that's okay. And that's one of the really wonderful things about group support or Facebook or social media, is that there isn't a strong commitment. So if it doesn't work out, it's really easy to not continue.
Yes, unsubscribe. Yes, decline. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. So this is actually the last of our slides. There are some references here as well for folks who would like to do further reading. If you want to learn more about student development theories or some of the identity theories that we talked about, there are links in here, and I'm happy again to send these to folks as are needed. But we did want to, make sure we open it up for any questions or comments that folks have. I think I'm going to hit unmute all because I think I muted a couple of folks. But, it'll be up to you whether you unmute your phone. But are there questions or tips or tricks or things that you have to add to any of the resources or conversation that we've had already?
One thing I'll just add is just to give a shout out for something that's free. Physical activity is free. Great way of increasing your ability to focus. So I think it's another thing that a lot of folks have noticed over the past month and a half is the classes have gone online, that they have a lot of difficulties focusing, even for people that don't have attention problems at baseline. So it's temporary, but 5-10 minutes of something that gets the blood moving. Could be in your room, could be going outside, that'd be great, but not everybody lives in a place where they can realistically do that. So anything really that gets the blood moving can be helpful for focusing, as well as for anxiety or other things like that. But I think for a lot of students, the semester is sort of turned into a teach yourself kind of semester, where they're no longer having consistent Zoom meetings, or professors have gone MIA. So, I mean, it's a perfect setup for not being able to focus, high anxiety, lack of social contact with other people, being back home with those responsibilities and those issues that come with being back home. So there's a lot of competing things, I think, so any little bit, I think, can help folks.
Thank you.
I also would just mention the Asian American students and around campus. I mean, I can generally count on one hand the number of students that I generally see. It's not a group typically that seeks out mental health treatment, but obviously now they're struggling in their own way, just because of all the things that are going on. And so I think the traditional ways of offering mental health treatment that might work for more mainstream folks, I guess if you want to call them that, may not necessarily work for folks like that. And so I think encouraging some of these self-care practices, working on things like sleep that are a little bit more concrete, ways of focusing, because that may be easier to kind of focus on academics and stuff like that. It's a more concrete way of kind of getting to the same thing. Maybe other ways of helping students with those issues.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions, thoughts? Hi, Darren. I see you snuck in there.
I'm gonna go.
Okay, well, that is all of our information for today. As I mentioned, if you would like a copy of this video, or you would like just a copy of the slides, you can drop your email or contact in the chat box here, or you can just email mss@bucknell.edu, and I will make sure that that gets to folks as well. But thank you all for joining us and for this conversation. I hope you were able to take some things away. And thank you, Dr. Johnson, for joining me on Thursday night, right before finals.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this helpful information, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Dean Jones. Great job, Rosalie.
Thank you. I'm about to hit the end meeting for everyone.
Okay. All right. Bye.
All right.